Welcome back. You're watching KTN News Desk with me, Akisa Wandera. Always a pleasure to have you tuned in. Of course, one of our top stories at this particular hour is the Northern Corridor Infrastructure Projects Summit, where President Uhuru Kenyatta is hosting President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda and President Paul Kagame of Rwanda, as well as a special envoy of President Salva Kiir of South Sudan for the 14th Summit of the Northern Corridor Integration Projects, NCIP, at the Safari Park Hotel here in Nairobi. Now, the NCIP is a multilateral development initiative established in 2013 and is aimed at speeding up development in the region, particularly the improvement of infrastructure for ease of movement of people, goods and services in the region. During the Nairobi meeting, the leaders are expected to review the progress made in the implementation of the various resolutions reached out during the 13th summit held in Kampala, Uganda on the 23rd of April 2016. Among the key projects expected to feature prominently during the meeting is a standard gauge railway, where significant progress has been made, with Kenya having successfully completed the Mombasa-Nairobi line and embarked on the Nairobi-Naivasha section, which is now at 50% completion. And that forms the basis of our conversation at this particular hour. Joining me in studio is Sylvester Kasuku. He is the CEO of the Lapset Corridor Development Authority. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us here on KTN News Desk.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
All right. Just quickly, because center stage for this particular summit is looking at the progress on some of the projects that have been spearheaded already. I know Lapset is among them. Just give us a status update of that.
Yes, we are making good progress, particularly on the Lapset Corridor program. And you've also mentioned good progress being made on the SGR. And specifically on Lapset, we are currently at 48% completion rate for Lamu Port, first 3 terminals that are under construction. And we are also in the process of packaging a transaction advisory process as we speak. And we'll be having transaction advisors on board in the next 1 month, supported by the African Development Bank. This is mainly to structure about 7 new terminals for construction and operations by private sector. It also includes packaging of the special economic zone in Lamu for purposes of investment by private sector. We are establishing one of the largest industrial bases in Africa next to Lamu Port, so that we have a twinning of the large, the magnanimous port that is being built in Lamu, backed up by an industrial base. So that we can achieve economies of scale. At the same time, we can move comfortably on the path to industrialization. And you are aware that the globe is currently at the stage of 4th Industrial Revolution. And it has been remarked, or it has been acknowledged, that the 4th Industrial Revolution is indeed being powered by technology and is riding on infrastructure. And regional integration infrastructure of the nature of Lapset Corridor are indeed the key drivers of this particular industrial revolution. And Africa must, at this particular juncture, be a key beneficiary and must leapfrog into serious development levels on the 4th Industrial Revolution.
So as a CEO of one of the major projects in the Northern Corridor, what are some of the things you expect will come out of this 14th summit?
Definitely, we are looking at a lot of synergy coming out of the summit. And you will reckon that the 14th summit does actually tell us that we have strengthened our integration in the region, and that countries in the region are now reading from the same script. And we are pursuing development, particularly infrastructure. And we are also creating a more conducive environment between the borders. You've seen that now you can travel to Uganda with an ID, the same to Rwanda, and you don't need to have a passport to go across the border. And we are fast also accepting the fact that you can also work in any part of the region. So this is already giving us a level playing field so that we can even be able to trade with each other more. And we can be able to leverage on each other's, strengths going forward.
You talk about synergy. Do you think, how would you describe the synergy as currently is in the East African community as far as infrastructure projects are concerned?
Yes, this synergy is definitely well emboldened through a collaborative framework in which we are pursuing regional integration infrastructure together or as a package. We are also, you've seen that even in terms of electric power supply, the region is fast accepting the fact that we cannot exist without each other. If there is enough power supply on one side of the region, then we should be able to share that across the board. And we should be able to have greater interconnectivity in all the infrastructure and services. And this is actually giving us a very strong platform for synergy. Yes.
So then, the conversation surrounding funding of these projects is definitely a white elephant in the room for all the countries in the East African region. LAPSSET project, once again, being one of the biggest projects being spearheaded in the Northern Corridor. Are you experiencing this? Are you hoping that after this particular summit, there will be a way forward in terms of how funding for these projects will be done by the member countries?
Definitely. No project can be pursued without funding. And the LAPSSET Corridor program is indeed, as you rightfully say, that one of the largest infrastructure programs in the region. Yes, funding is being spearheaded both jointly and also separately. Because, of course, in terms of signing, instruments of financing requires the legality of the specific entity that is signing that. But we do appreciate the fact that if, let's say, there's a railway or a road that is crossing from the Kenyan side and going to, let's say, to the Ugandan side, or crossing from the Kenyan side, going to the Ethiopian side, then we must have synergy in terms of coordination. And one of the best examples is the Isiolo, Moyale, up to Hawassa Road. That's 1,000 kilometers. That has been strongly financed through syndication by the African Development Bank and also the European Investment Bank. And you realize that on the Kenyan side, you have the 500 kilometers, and you also have another 500 kilometers on the Ethiopian side. Yeah. We've both worked in synergy, by Kenya meeting its funding obligations with the African Development Bank and the other financiers. At the same time, Ethiopia also meeting its funding obligations. But we are also brought together by, let's say, the African Development Bank. When we are discussing this particular road, we come as two entities, but we are championing one regional integration project. So this also goes a long way together, even with SGR, whereas Kenya is financing its part, and Uganda is also financing its part. But you realize that we must coordinate. We have to synergize our efforts so that we both deliver with the greater timelines.
There have been reports that cash crunch and the slow pace in terms of money coming in is being attributed to the slow pace of these particular projects. Is this being experienced at LAPSSET?
You do know that financing is always the big elephant in the room.
It is.
Everywhere in the world. It's not just peculiar to Kenya, neither is it peculiar to East Africa or even African countries alone. Financing is usually is usually the critical success factor of any infrastructure program. I would say that we are not really, in a kind of a corner, the way it has come out of your mouth. I believe
it seems like you're in. So then expound this for us.
That's a perception. Yeah? Yes, that's a perception. But I would like to say that we are strategically handling the issue of financing of projects. And you can see that, just to give you an example with the Lamu Port, the government has not taken a loan anywhere, neither is it depending on any other development partner anywhere. But the government is financing Lamu Port development from its own budget, which means every financial year we devote resources through budgetary frameworks to finance that particular undertaking. And it's a major undertaking being financed directly by the government. So I would like to say that we have a strong commitment as a government in funding these key infrastructure projects. And as we speak, I would say we are on track, and we are in good focus, and we are achieving results. And as we speak, we are also building the road that connects Kenya and South Sudan. And I've already mentioned that the road that connects Kenya and Ethiopia is already more or less completed. And you've also seen that the crude oil pipeline is fast coming onto the table with regard to implementation works. As we speak, the government is undertaking the front-end engineering design, as well as the relevant safeguard studies, like environmental studies. And this will be completed by April next year, when investment decision making will be made. So you can see that we are actually meeting the timelines, the project timelines, as it were, and at the same time moving strategically, and at the same time devoting the required resources. So each of the projects are running, on different timescales.
So then what is the biggest headache right now?
Of course, I would like to say that as a government, we have turned challenges into opportunities. Like if funding, let's say specifically on certain aspects, might be seen to be a difficulty, then the government has come up with strategies on how to handle that. Like instead of looking for some development partner or anyone else to come and, let's say, lend us money to build the port, the government has put money ahead of time and is devoting money each and every financial year. When it comes to the crude oil pipeline, this is a very profitable investment, and pipelines are one of the best projects globally, because they do pay for themselves very quickly. So we will be able, again, to leverage on private sector capacity and interest in this particular endeavor. Going into the 7 terminals that we are going to bring on board, the government is not going to, put money in that particular endeavor, because these are being transacted for private sector investments. So whereas the big story is usually that financing is a big headache to many governments. In Kenya today, we have come up with the strategies on how to include private sector interests in government programs like the one of LAPSET that we are pursuing, so that we deliver together with private sector where they have an interest and where government needs to deliver. So we are working with private sector.
So then you say the Kenyan government has been acting swiftly in terms of financing these projects.
Absolutely.
Is it happening with the other member countries? Would you confidently say that you're working in tandem as far as ensuring that these particular projects are fully financed and done in the stipulated timelines? I
would strongly say so, because the idea of a private sector inclusion in infrastructure development is now something that is actually globally accepted. And many arrangements, either by direct investment by private sector or PPP arrangements and the like, all these are now acceptable frameworks for delivering in areas where the government has an interest. So I would say that I know maybe from the perception that you are speaking, could tell us that maybe people expect much or faster delivery. But remember that for infrastructure, for construction of infrastructure to start being visible, there is a lot of work that happens at the background, first of all. You have to do designs, you have to do project preparations, you have to do financing arrangements, and by the time you've seen men and women working with machines on the ground, then a lot more work has been done beyond the construction.
Okay, I want us to wrap it up, but before we do, the geopolitics is nothing we can run away from as far as the EAC is concerned. We know that Tanzania and Burundi have had their own concerns about the various projects that are being spearheaded by the EAC to enhance integration. Some have gone as far as to say that these projects look like they're more keen on benefiting the host country, which is Kenya. How are these politics surrounding these projects and the East African community at large affecting these projects?
Now you are introducing me to a new field. I'm not good in politics.
Definitely. But as a CEO of this project, it won't be new to the geopolitics. You're working as member states.
I would like to say that politically speaking, I think that is overreading, positions, or making a lot more conclusions beyond what is reality on the table. You will reckon that infrastructure development is not just confined to a particular country or to a particular region. And going forward, African leaders in unison under the African Union have resolved that we need to build much more infrastructure. For example, we need to build about 37,000 kilometers of new roads, 37,000 kilometers of new roads in Africa. We need to build about 32,000 new kilometers of railway. We need to build about 1.3 ton added capacity for ports in Africa by the year 2040. The estimated budget for all this for the continent is about $360 billion. So looking at all this positioning let's say, at the continental leadership level, you definitely expect that each and every country and each and every region of the continent must really spearhead real infrastructure development. So any aspect of infrastructure development taking place in Kenya does not disadvantage any country. Any infrastructure development taking place in any other country does not disadvantage Kenya. What I would like to say is that we need greater capacity, we need greater mass of infrastructure across the entire continent. So any reading of any mispositioning, of any misrepresentation wouldn't do us great good. And making it look political wouldn't also give us mileage that we are looking for.
So what is this reality that you say is on the ground, apart from what you say is being misrepresented? Because we know Tanzania remains non-committal. What is the reality?
The reality is that all the countries in the region are working together. And if you look at the EAC document, of which the government of Tanzania is a signatory, and you will recall that we recently had the 19th ordinary session of the EAC summit that was held in Uganda. And all the countries of the region were in that summit. And the projects that have been prioritized under EAC, which includes all the countries in the region, are published. And we have all agreed upon on how they should be developed. Whether you are talking about the Northern Corridor, you are talking about the Central Corridor, you are talking about the Lapsset Corridor, all these have been prioritized and accepted by all the regional leaders. So any reading of politics, of course, is good to keep us going. Sometimes...
Politics is a very central part of everything that happens in the world, not just in the East African region.
Yes. So I know you people would lack news if you don't talk politics.
No, it is major. It is major because it's in the public domain that Tanzania still remains non-committal. But I want to wrap this up.
Not really.
Going forward, what do we expect to see? You say Lapsset is 48% done. What do we expect to see?
That is Lamu Port.
Yeah, the Lamu Port, rather. What do we expect to see with the other projects?
Under construction, and more are also coming on stream. The crude oil pipeline is also going to come on stream. We expect to see the completion of all the 3 terminals constructed by 2020. We expect to see the crude oil pipeline completed by 2021. We expect to see the road connections that are currently under construction also completed by 2020, 2021. We expect to see more investments in the industrial base in Lamu, among many other areas. We expect to see the investments in the airports. And of course, you've seen the Isiolo airport is already completed. And there is also the program to continue to improve more of the airports within the corridor so that we can have easier, greater access into the corridor. We expect to see progress on the product oil pipeline that will supply northern Kenya as well as Ethiopia coming on stream. So we have a lot of development works that are currently both at the planning stage and those that are already at the construction stage. And we expect to see more terminal development by private sector and operations by private sector coming on stream as we talk about the deadline of 2020 and more uptake for investments between 2021 and 2030.
All right. Thank you very much for coming into studio and helping us to shed more light on this project. Sylvester Kasuku is the CEO of the Lapsset Corridor Development Authority. Once again, thank you for making time for us here on KTN News Desk. I want us to take a quick break. We'll be back with more news, taking a look at what is happening in the counties and, of course, on the international front. And then 2:30, Robinson Okenya will be coming in with sports news. Don't go too far.
This is KTN News.